The station clock struck 3 in the morning, its hands trembling toward the hour with a hollow echo that filled the empty hall. The world outside was asleep, but inside, beneath the pale glow of gas lamps, one man stood waiting for a train that seemed meant only for him. His name was Samuel Carter, though on the passenger list it appeared simply as S. Carter. He was 63 years old, shoulders bent from years of work at the shipyard, hair silvered not only by age but by regrets too long carried. Tonight was different. Tonight, he was not boarding for labor or duty. Tonight was about going home. The platform stretched into darkness, slick with rain. A thin mist clung to the tracks, rising like breath from the earth itself. Samuel clutched his worn leather satchel, the same one he had carried in his youth, its seams frayed, its handle patched. He shifted his weight nervously, glancing at the timetable nailed to the wall. The schedule was old, ink faded. Few trains passed through at this hour anymore. Some said this line had been abandoned years ago, but Samuel knew better. He had been told the last train would come, if he waited. And so he waited. Waiting always brought memories. He saw himself as a boy, racing along this very platform to greet his father returning from the mines. He saw his wife, Margaret, waving a handkerchief the day he left for work in another city, promising he'd return by Christmas. That Christmas had passed, and many others after it. Life had a way of keeping him away longer than he intended. Now his children were grown, his grandchildren almost strangers. Letters had gone unanswered. Calls had been missed. Too much time had been squandered. But tonight, Samuel whispered to himself, "I will make it back." A distant whistle broke the silence, low and haunting, as though torn from the throat of the night itself. Samuel straightened, heart pounding. The rails began to hum, the mist trembling with anticipation. Out of the darkness, a headlight pierced the fog, round and golden, like an unblinking eye. The train emerged slowly, black iron, polished steel, a relic from another century. Samuel's breath caught. He had not seen such a train in decades, yet it looked as though it had been waiting for him all along. The door screeched open with a groan that carried across the platform. Samuel tightened his grip on the satchel, took one last look at the empty station behind him, and stepped forward. Because sometimes, the last train isn't about where it goes. It's about where it finally brings you back. And before we board this last train together, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. Because here on Years Ago Stories, every journey carries a lesson worth remembering. Samuel settled into a worn leather seat, its cushion cracked from decades of travelers who had come before him. The carriage smelled faintly of coal smoke and old wood polish. The lights flickered as the train jolted forward, the rhythm of the wheels clattering against the rails like a heartbeat. For a moment, Samuel closed his eyes and simply listened. The sound was hypnotic, a lullaby from another age. But with every turn of the wheels, memories stirred, memories he had tried for years to bury. He remembered being a boy of 8, standing on this very line, gripping his mother's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. His father had come home from the mines on this train, face blackened with soot but eyes shining. He would lift Samuel onto his shoulders and carry him down the street, laughing despite his exhaustion. That memory was warm, safe, and Samuel had longed to give his own children the same kind of stability. But life had taken him elsewhere, work contracts in other cities, promises of better wages, a never-ending cycle of just one more year. His wife, Margaret, had always been patient. He could still see her on the platform the day he left for what was supposed to be a short job in another town. She waved her handkerchief, eyes bright with pride but tinged with sadness. "I'll be back by Christmas," he had told her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But Christmas came and went. So did the next one. Letters grew shorter. Phone calls became hurried. And before long, Samuel had slipped into a rhythm of absence, convincing himself that providing from afar was enough. He regretted it now. He regretted every Christmas dinner he had missed, every birthday candle blown out without him. Every school play where his children had searched the crowd for his face and found only Margaret's. The train swayed gently as Samuel stared at his reflection in the darkened window. His hair had gone silver. His hands were scarred and stiff. He had gained wages, houses, promotions, but lost the very things he once worked for. What use were savings if the people he loved had spent decades without him? What was the value of a house if it was never truly a home? His chest ached, not just with age but with longing. "I've missed too much," he whispered to the glass. "But maybe I can still make it right." From his satchel, he pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. Inside was a letter he had written years ago but never mailed. His handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged. "Dear Margaret, I know I promised I'd be home by Christmas. I know I've broken that promise too many times, but please know I've never stopped loving you, or the children. Each day away from you has been a wound I've carried. I am trying to finish what I started so that I can come back for good. Wait for me, Samuel." He had folded it carefully and placed it in his bag, meaning to send it, but pride had silenced him. He had told himself he would return in person and explain. He never had. Now, decades later, the letter was useless. Margaret was gone, buried in the churchyard beside the house he had once promised to repair. But maybe, just maybe, his children would want to see it. Maybe it would show them that he had loved them, even in his failures. Samuel pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. He pictured his son, now a man in his 50s, his daughter, surely a grandmother herself. He wondered if they remembered him kindly, or if they had hardened their hearts against the father who had left too often. The train lurched, and his heart lurched with it. This was his last chance. He could not undo the past, but he could still ask for forgiveness. He could still try to be a part of their lives, even if only for a little while. Out the window, towns blurred by familiar, yet altered. He recognized the outlines of factories where he had once labored, now rusted and silent. He saw bridges he had crossed in youth, painted new colors but still spanning the same waters. Each landmark was a ghost, whispering reminders of time lost and choices made. And yet, with each mile, Samuel felt lighter. The train was carrying him not only home but back to the boy who had once run to greet his father, to the man who had once promised Margaret he'd return. This was not just a journey across distance. It was a journey across years, across regrets, across silence. As the train curved into the night, Samuel tightened his grip on the satchel. His voice was barely audible, but steady. "I'm coming home," he said, "for real this time." The wheels clattered on, a rhythm like a heartbeat, steady, determined, unstoppable. The train rattled steadily through the night, its whistle echoing across empty fields. Samuel leaned against the window, watching sparks fly briefly from the wheels as the tracks curved. He was lost in thought when the seat across from him creaked. A young man settled in, barely 20, uniform crisp cap tucked under his arm. His eyes were wide, restless, half excitement, half fear. "Evening, sir," he said politely. Samuel nodded. "Evening?" The young man fidgeted, then asked, "First time writing this line?" Samuel smiled faintly. "No, but it feels like it." The boy introduced himself as Private Lewis, bound for a base up north. He spoke quickly, nervously, as if silence might swallow him whole. "My folks didn't want me to go," he admitted, staring at his boots. "Mama cried for days. But I told her sometimes you have to leave to prove yourself. You know?" Samuel's throat tightened. He remembered saying nearly the same words to Margaret long ago. "Yes," he murmured. "I know." They rode in silence for a moment, before Samuel asked, "Do you plan to come back?" "Of course," Lewis said quickly, then softer. "I hope." Samuel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then write. Don't wait too long to tell them what they mean to you. You may think there's time, but there isn't always." The boy looked startled by the intensity in Samuel's voice, but he nodded firmly. "I will, sir." Later, in the dining car, Samuel found himself seated beside an elderly widow with kind eyes. She carried a small photograph in her purse and showed it to anyone who asked. "My husband," she explained to Samuel, "was a railway man. Worked these tracks for 40 years. Every night he came home smelling of coal dust, and I loved him for it." She smiled wistfully. "He's gone now, but when I ride the train, I feel him near." Samuel studied the photo, a smiling man in uniform, cap tilted jauntily. He envied the way her voice carried peace rather than regret. "You were lucky," he said softly. She shook her head gently. "No, sir. I wasn't lucky. I was present. We made the time count while we had it." The words pierced him. Present. That was the thing he had never been. As Samuel returned to his seat, a little girl wandered down the aisle, clutching a rag doll. She stopped at his knees and peered up at him. "Are you going home?" she asked innocently. Samuel's lips trembled into a smile. "Yes, child. At last, I am." She nodded solemnly. "That's good. Mamas and papas get sad when people don't come home." Her mother hurried up, apologizing, but Samuel waved her off. The child's words lingered in his heart like a bell tolling softly through the fog. By midnight, the train car had grown quiet. Passengers dozed, the rhythm of the rails rocking them into uneasy dreams. Samuel remained awake, his thoughts tumbling. The soldier's anxious hope, the widow's acceptance, the child's simple wisdom. Each encounter felt less like coincidence and more like a message meant for him. He whispered into the hum of the train, "I hear you. All of you." The train entered a long tunnel, and for a moment the windows reflected only Samuel's face. He barely recognized the man staring back, lined with years, shadowed by choices. Yet in his eyes flickered something new, something unbroken, resolve. When the train burst out into moonlight again, Samuel pressed his palm to the glass. The countryside swept by, silvered fields and quiet towns. Each mile carried him closer, not just to his family, but to the man he had always wanted to be. As dawn's first light tinged the horizon, Samuel felt the train begin to slow. A conductor's voice called out the name of a station he hadn't heard in decades. His heart raced. The last leg of the journey was beginning. The train slowed as it curved through a valley, dawn spilling across the horizon like liquid fire. Samuel rubbed his eyes, weary but restless. He could not sleep. Every sound of the train was a reminder that time was moving, carrying him closer to a reckoning he could neither delay nor avoid. A tall conductor moved down the aisle, tipping his cap politely to passengers still awake. When he stopped at Samuel's row, he studied the older man with a faint smile. "Long journey for you?" the conductor asked. Samuel nodded. "Longest one I've ever taken." The conductor chuckled softly. "Funny thing about this train, it doesn't run for everyone, only for those who need it most." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" But the man only tipped his cap again and moved on, leaving Samuel with the unsettling thought that this ride was not merely about rails and timetables. As the countryside brightened, Samuel pulled out his satchel and laid the contents on the seat beside him. The unsent letter to Margaret, a pocket watch she had once given him, a photograph of his children when they were still small. He opened the photograph, edges curling with age. His son wore a wide grin, front teeth missing. His daughter clutched a rag doll. Both had looked straight at the camera, trusting, unaware that their father's work would carry him so far away for so long. Tears blurred his vision. He whispered, "I should have been there, for scraped knees, for birthdays, for graduations. Instead, I sent money and excuses." The truth struck him like a blow. He had provided, but he had not been present, and presence was the only thing his family had ever truly needed. At the next station, a new passenger boarded a woman dressed in black, veil covering her face. She sat across from Samuel, silent at first, hands folded neatly on her lap. After several minutes, she spoke softly. "You look troubled, sir." Samuel hesitated. "I'm going home after many years, but I'm afraid they may not want me back." The woman tilted her head. Home isn't always about being wanted. Sometimes it's about showing up, even when it hurts. The act itself can heal. Her words lingered, heavy and comforting all at once. When Samuel looked again, she was gone, vanished, as though she had never boarded. He shivered, uncertain if she had been real or merely a figment conjured by his weary heart. Night turned to morning, and passengers stirred awake. Samuel leaned forward, clutching the satchel to his chest. The rhythmic clatter of the train seemed louder now, echoing his pulse. In the glass reflection, he no longer saw just an old man. He saw the sum of all his choices, good and bad. He saw the young father who had promised too much, the absent husband who had left Margaret waiting, the man who had run from presents because presents felt too heavy. But he also saw something else, a chance. The reflection stared back at him, lined and weary, but alive. "This is it," he whispered. "The last train. No more delays." The conductor's voice rang out, announcing the next station, Samuel's hometown. His heart leapt to his throat. The wheels screeched slightly as the train began to slow, the smell of smoke and steel filling the air. Samuel pressed the letter, the photograph, and the pocket watch into his satchel. His hands trembled, but his resolve was firm. Would they forgive him? Would they even open the door? He did not know, but he knew this: the waiting was over. The train ground to a halt, steam hissing around the platform. Samuel rose slowly, gripping the handle of his satchel like a lifeline. Outside, through the fog, he thought he saw figures waiting. Were they strangers? Or could it be family? His knees weakened. The moment had come. The hiss of steam filled the platform as the train finally halted. Samuel gripped the handle of his satchel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His legs felt heavy, as if the weight of every missed year pressed down on his knees. He stepped onto the platform slowly. The mist curled around him, wrapping the air in a veil of uncertainty. His breath clouded in front of him, quick and shallow. And then he saw them. At first, the figures were only shadows, 2, 3, maybe more. Samuel's heart pounded as the fog shifted, revealing faces. A man in his 50s stood with shoulders broad, eyes searching. Beside him, a woman of similar age, hair streaked with silver, clutched a small bundle in her arms. Samuel's throat tightened. His son, his daughter, and in the woman's arms, a child, his grandchild, though he had never met the others before her. He took one step forward, then hesitated. What right did he have to call them his? He had missed their youth, their triumphs, their heartbreaks. He had been a name on letters that grew less frequent, a voice on phone calls that came too late, a father in memory more than in presence. But as he stood frozen, his daughter raised her eyes. She met his gaze and did not look away. Slowly, she shifted the bundle in her arms and began to walk toward him. When she reached him, she did not speak. Instead, she extended the child. Samuel's hands trembled as he accepted the small body, warm and alive, wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby's eyes blinked open, wide and curious. Tears streamed down Samuel's cheeks. "Hello," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm your grandfather." Behind him, his son stepped forward. For a long moment, father and son stood face to face. The younger man's jaw was set, eyes glistening with years of unspoken words. Finally, he spoke, voice rough. "You came back." "I did," Samuel said. "Too late, I know, but I did." His son exhaled sharply, the sound caught between anger and relief. Then, with a sudden motion, he pulled Samuel into a rough embrace. "Don't you dare leave again," he muttered. Samuel clung to him, shoulders shaking. Never again. The family gathered close, their words few, but their presence everything. His daughter slipped her arm through his, steadying his steps. His son carried the satchel. The grandchild nestled against Samuel's chest, cooing softly. As they left the platform, Samuel felt years of distance collapsing. For the first time in decades, he was not walking alone. They led him through familiar streets, past shops that had changed, parks that had grown new trees. Finally, they stopped before a modest house on Hawthorne Street, the same street where he had once promised Margaret they would build a home together. The sight of it nearly brought Samuel to his knees. He remembered Margaret's laughter in the garden, the sound of children's footsteps on the porch. He whispered her name into the evening air. "She'd be glad you came back," his daughter said softly, her eyes shining. Samuel nodded, pressing the baby close. "I only wish I had sooner." As night fell, they entered the home. On the windowsill glowed a small lantern, its flame steady, casting a circle of warmth into the dark. Samuel's daughter noticed his stare. "Mama kept it burning every night," she explained. "Said it was for you, just in case." Samuel reached out and touched the lantern's handle with trembling fingers. "Then she never stopped waiting," he whispered. That night, Samuel sat at the kitchen table surrounded by family. The baby slept peacefully. His son poured tea. His daughter hummed a tune Margaret once loved. For the first time, Samuel felt whole. But as he looked into their faces, he realized the journey was not over. There was one more step to take, the step from forgiveness into legacy, from reunion into meaning. Tomorrow, he would tell them everything. The house on Hawthorne Street was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that carries both absence and peace. Samuel sat at the kitchen table, hands folded around a mug of tea his daughter had prepared. Across from him, his son leaned back in the chair, arms crossed but eyes softening. The baby's faint cries drifted from the other room, followed by a lullaby his daughter hummed. One Samuel recognized Margaret's favorite tune. When dawn came, Samuel woke not to the sound of train whistles or factory bells, but to the aroma of fresh bread and the creak of floorboards above. He shuffled to the porch and found his granddaughter, no more than 5 years old, playing with chalk on the steps. She looked up and smiled shyly. "Grandpa?" she asked, testing the word as if it were fragile. Samuel's chest ached. "Yes, darling, I'm your grandpa." The word lingered in the air, solid and real. For decades he had carried titles: foreman, worker, traveler, but Grandpa was the one he had longed for most. Later that day, his daughter led him to the backyard. Roses bloomed wildly along the fence, thick and untamed, but unmistakably the same ones Margaret had planted years before. "She never stopped tending them," his daughter said. "Even when you were gone, even when people told her to let go. She said the roses would remind her that promises were still alive." Samuel knelt by the flowers, pressing his palm to the soil. "She waited," he whispered. "She waited in her own way." Tears blurred his eyes. But they were not only of sorrow, they carried gratitude too. At supper, Samuel unfolded the old photograph of his children and the unsent letter to Margaret. He laid them on the table without a word. His son picked up the photo, studying it as if holding a piece of lost time. "You kept this?" his son asked, voice hushed. Samuel nodded. "I carried it everywhere. I was too proud, too foolish to admit how much I missed you. I thought providing was enough. It wasn't." He slid the letter across the table. "I wrote this decades ago, but never sent it. I wanted to come back in person, but by the time I was ready, I had already lost too much." Silence stretched. His daughter touched the letter gently, reading the faded lines. "She would have forgiven you, Dad. Mama never stopped loving you." Samuel's hands trembled. "Do you?" he asked. His son met his gaze, jaw tight, then softened. "I don't know how to forget the years, but I know how to start again, and maybe that's enough." In the days that followed, Samuel found himself woven back into the fabric of family life. He walked his granddaughter to school, listening to her chatter about dolls and songs. He repaired a squeaky step on the porch, his hands still skilled with tools despite their age. He sat at the table each evening, joining prayers he had missed for decades. Trust did not return overnight, but each small act, a smile, a shared story, A mended hinge stitched a new thread into the family tapestry. One evening, his son brought out an old baseball glove. "You promised to teach me to play," he said quietly. "I think it's time you taught her." He gestured toward his daughter, who squealed with delight. Samuel slipped the glove onto her tiny hand, his heart full. He had missed teaching his own children, but here, at last, he could give what remained. On Sunday, they walked together to the churchyard. Margaret's headstone stood beneath an oak tree, weathered but graceful. Samuel knelt, laying roses across the grave. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for the years I stole from us, for the promises broken. But I made it back, Maggie. I kept the last promise. I came home." His children stood beside him, silent witnesses. The wind rustled the oak leaves as if answering, a gentle benediction. That night, Samuel lit the lantern in the window himself. Its glow spilled across the street, steady and warm. His daughter smiled softly. "You know," she said, "Mama used to say the lantern wasn't just for you. She said it was for all of us. A reminder that no matter how dark it got, someone was always waiting, always hoping." Samuel nodded, understanding at last. The lantern was not about absence, it was about faith. Faith that the people we love will find their way back, one way or another. Weeks turned into months. Samuel grew weaker, but also lighter, as if each day at home healed a piece of the burden he had carried. One evening he sat with his granddaughter on the porch swing, the lantern glowing beside them. "Grandpa," she asked, "why do you always watch the trains?" He smiled. "Because trains remind me of journeys. Some are long, some are short. Some take us far, but the best ones bring us home." She leaned against him, content, and he closed his eyes, savoring the moment. Samuel knew his time was nearing its end, but he no longer feared it. He had come home. He had been forgiven enough to belong again, and he had left a story that would outlive him. A story of mistakes, yes, but also of return, of love reclaimed, of promises kept at last. The last train had not just carried him across miles. It had carried him back into the hearts of those he loved. And so, dear listener, Samuel's journey asks us all, who is waiting for you? What words have you left unsaid? What door could still open if you had the courage to knock? Time cannot be undone, but love can still be planted today. Don't wait for the last train to remind you. Share in the comments a promise you still hold or a reunion you still hope for. Subscribe to Years Ago Stories and ring the bell, because every journey carries a lesson worth remembering, and the next story may just be the reminder you need.